I'm Donovan Kane. Welcome to this week's podcast, where I read erotic stories for women to you. Why? Well, because sometimes you just want a man to read you a naughty story. This week's erotic story is from a guest author, Sage Nite, and it's called The Checklist. I hope you enjoy it. The Checklist by Sage Nite.
Jade woke up on a Saturday morning to the sound of rumbling mufflers from cars busily traveling back and forth down her street, on their way to their exciting destinations. So she thought. As she lay there in her pink satin camisole, she couldn't help think that today was going to be like every other day. She sat up and decided that she wouldn't let it. Today was going to be the beginning of many new adventures. What to do first was the only thing on her mind. In a little wooden treasure box that sat by her bed was a piece of lined paper, with the edges still frayed where she had ripped it out of her notebook. This was not just any piece of paper, but just the opposite. Written on it was a letter she had written to herself 5 years earlier. 5 years ago, Jade lost something that meant everything to her. She lost the love of her life, her soulmate, as she called him. He was her forever. They laughed, had dreams together, and were inseparable. Some of her favorite memories were the sexual encounters they had. The love they made during those engagements was much different than the average love story. They lusted for each other, and it showed. One of her most memorable times happened on a spontaneous trip to Nowhere Land. Sporadic events didn't happen very often, as they both had commitments and busy lives. But this one particular incident will forever live in her mind. As she recalls it, the love of her life pulled out a map one Friday afternoon, closed his eyes, and dropped a coin onto the disarray of lines that encompassed the vast choices of cities across the U.S. Wherever it landed was where they were headed. The coin landed on the city of Asheville, North Carolina. Neither of them had ever been to Asheville, but they soon would experience it together. Jade quickly packed a bag of essentials, a couple of outfits, lingerie, her sex toys, lube, and, of course, a few items for the shower. Excitement and energy filled the air as they got into his black Jeep Wrangler and set off for a weekend of fun. It was a 6-hour trip, so along the way they were able to tease each other with erotic foreplay. Jade had placed the sex toys in the front seat by her, as she thought they may come in handy along the way. She took out her pink vibrator 30 minutes into the trip and began putting on a show for her love, to pass the time. She slowly caressed her clit with the pulsating vibrator, touching each sensitive nerve. She could feel her clit hardening with pleasure as she lathered the wet cum that began to drip from her pussy. As her caressing became even quicker and with more pressure, the moans began to escape her lips. Her insides began tingling with pleasure as her hips jumped up and down with the rhythm of her moans. Within minutes, the sensation became overwhelming, and she cried out in euphoria, her uncontrollable burst of gratification that took over her body with an explosive rush. As she looked over at him, he was smiling, taking it all in, as his hand was rubbing on the bulge that had formed in the crotch of his pants. She knew how to help the intensity of his newfound erection. She first reached over with cum-lathered hands and gently outlined his lips with the sweet juices that had just expelled from her body. He used his tongue to take in the taste of her. She then unbuckled his belt and jeans and unveiled a rock-hard cock that she couldn't wait to get her lips around. She leaned over the console to lower her head and wrap her yearning mouth around the shaft of his cock. Slowly at first, she glided her mouth up and down, letting his cock fill every inch of space until it was lodged down the back of her throat. The enjoyment of his escapade was shown by squirming and it was heard through the quiet puffs of breath that were obvious additions to his normal breathing. This made Jade very wet, just thinking about the pleasure she was fulfilling for her man. She kept her mouth full, bobbing up and down, while her tongue was let loose to massage the rock-hard muscle. Her hands wrapped around his balls to squeeze and accentuate the pleasure of the sucking. She could feel his cock begin to pulse, knowing that an orgasm was soon to come. As she removed her mouth, her hands replaced it, curling her fingers around the hot, wet shaft in order for her to help him attain what she so longed to give him. She rubbed and caressed and manipulated his cock within her hands until the white, creamy cum came spurting out into a stream, which Jade relished. She opened her longing mouth wide and allowed the stream to shoot down her throat as she took in every drop with the utmost joy. She smiled and knew that this was going to be one hell of a trip. Having lost herself a minute in past memories, she knew she had new ones to create and wanted to get to it. Jade had become an independent woman and had goals and dreams of her own. The hard part was knowing that they'd have to be accomplished without him in her life. The reminiscing stopped, and she opened the paper, pressing down the creases so she could read it again, yet another time. The letter read, "Dear Jade, this letter represents a major change in your life. It acts as a reminder to you that there is a whole world out there that you have to discover. Don't let it get away. Here is a list of items I am challenging you to accomplish. Pick and choose what is right at the time, but know each one will bring you new experiences that will forever live in your mind and help you to become the person you set out to be. Challenges to be unveiled. 1. Travel to an exotic beach destination. 2. Learn to scuba dive. 3. Have a bisexual encounter. 4. Perform a strip-tease act. 5. Enjoy a weekend at a nudist resort. 6. Take part in a wild and crazy fuckfest at a far-off destination. 7. Drive a race car at a professional racetrack. 8. Parachute out of an airplane. Sincerely, Jade. She read the list over and over in her head. She had yet to check one off, but today was the day of this new beginning she had promised herself in her letter. Jade thought long and hard about what to do, and came to the conclusion that she would just start with the first one and work her way down. Who knows? Maybe she could check off many at one time, depending on what she chose to do. All she knew was that she needed this. She deserved this. The first choice on the list was a trip to a warm beach destination. Okay, then, she thought. That's what I'll do. She pulled out her laptop and searched for all-inclusive resorts in Mexico. She had always wanted to visit Mexico, and now was the time. She found a resort in Cancun that offered exactly what she was looking for: 3 pools, cabanas on the beach, and was listed as an adult-only resort. How could she go wrong? The next flight leaving for Cancun was at 6 a.m. Sunday morning. She knew if she didn't just do it, life would somehow get in the way. She was surprised to find that because it was a last-minute deal, her 3-day trip would cost her $1,000. Perfect. She clicked on Book Now, and she knew there was no turning back. Jade spent the rest of her day packing and making phone calls so that everything was in place and ready to go. She fell asleep early Saturday night, knowing that she may not get much sleep over the next few days. She woke early Sunday morning, jumped up, showered, and headed to the airport. She had chosen to wear her little bitty white bikini underneath a tight pair of running pants and a low-cut V-neck T-shirt, so she could be ready for the warm sun and cool, crisp ocean water when she arrived at the resort. Jade had everything ready, and all she wanted was to get there. Her day started out smoothly with a nice, easy trip to the airport and a parking spot right in front. With excitement in her step, she was almost running as she entered through the sliding glass doors at the front. Smiling from ear to ear, she walked up to the security gate and thought, "This should be a breeze. I barely have anything on, so I should be able to rush right through." Little did she know that that would be a problem. Sitting behind the desk was a young man who, you could tell, loved his job. As she slowly and carefully stepped through the tunnel, a beeping sound echoed through the building. Jade knew this was a ploy, so she played along. She stood very still as the young man came jaunting out from behind his computer, head high, shoulders out, to tell her that there would be a quick pat-down, just to make sure she wasn't concealing anything dangerous. Jade kept smiling, squirmed, and cooed as his hands ran up and down her body. She had made his day. She winked at him as he gave her the all-clear to be on her way. As she strolled along the corridor to her gate, she heard the commanding voice of an airline attendant say, "Now boarding for Cancun, Mexico. Please have your boarding passes ready." And here we go, she thought. She snuggled into the middle of 3 seats aboard the airplane, and as she heard the engines begin to rumble, she closed her eyes, fell asleep, and dreamt of what might happen on this new adventure. The next thing Jade knew, a kind hand from the airline attendant was tapping her shoulder to let her know the plane had just landed. Jade jumped out of her seat, weaved through the narrow aisle, dodging the seats with her beach bag on her shoulder. After grabbing her pink polka-dot suitcase from the luggage carousel, she headed out of the terminal to find a shuttle right in front of her, waiting to take her to the resort. Everything was going perfect, and she knew fate had played a part in making this trip so smooth. The shuttle ride was a quick 10 minutes, and it all began. She was greeted at the front of the entrance to the resort with a margarita and a smile from a well-sculpted, handsome man that she knew was perfect for the job, with the charm he gave off in his welcoming her to the resort. As he took the bags from her hand, his defined forearm glided across her breasts, sending a chill down her spine. That was a sign that this was going to be a vacation she'd never forget. As planned, she stripped down to her white string bikini that was gaping to get out and be seen. This was Jade's favorite bikini and was bound to turn some heads. Her voluptuous breasts peeked from behind the tiny pieces of cloth that made up the top half. The bottoms were just as revealing, leaving nothing to the imagination, with her tan cheeks rounded to perfection around the string that held the suit together. Jade headed down to one of the elegant swimming pools that was located in the heart of the resort. Surrounded by miraculous palm trees, a coconut smell filled the air, masked by a salty saturation of ocean water wafting up from the coast. She took a long look around at the available empty chairs, and almost by fate an empty chair lay open next to a hunk of a man, staring straight back at her, watching her every move. She didn't travel to Mexico to find someone new. She had already experienced what loving your soulmate entailed. But, she thought, I could check 2 or 3 things off my list, with the opportunity to possibly put on a striptease act for this handsome stranger, or have a partner in crime in fulfilling a wild and crazy night of an all-out fuckfest that could invariably take place if the stars were aligned just right. The two began to talk immediately, while sipping down hurricanes and pina coladas. She learned his name was Jack, and then thought to herself, "Oh, Jack, you have no idea what I could do for you." Hours went by, and the longer they were together, the more certain she became that her checklist was definitely going to get shorter. She remembered the saying, "What happens in Mexico stays in Mexico." As the sun began to set, Jade knew she did not want this night to end. To her surprise, the gentleman and Jack took her by the hand and led her to the sandy beach. "Where are we going?" Jade questioned. Jack answered, "Well, we can't miss the second most beautiful thing in Mexico. You and the sunset." They sat on the beach as the orange hues of the sun faded into the horizon, as the ocean water seemed to suck the light from the sky. Emotion gave way to this heartfelt moment, and Jack leaned over and ever so gently laid his moist, carefree lips onto hers. Her immediate reaction was not what one may think. She wondered, "Wow, his lips are so smooth. I wonder what he puts on them to keep the sun from chapping them." Jade had come to Mexico for an adventure, not to find love, and that was what she was going to do. They shared the perfect kiss as the sun finished its duties for the day. As their mouths parted, Jade excitedly exclaimed, "I want to rock your world tonight, Jack. Let's clean up and meet back at Tidal Waves Bar to keep this wonderful night alive." After a quick shower, Jade put on a black, skin-tight, short little number. Strapless with cutouts at her sides, she felt sexy and was anxious for this night to begin. Jack showed up in tight-fitting jeans that framed his sexy ass perfectly. She truly couldn't wait to get her hands around those sweet cheeks. His white T-shirt fit snug in just the right places, and the outline of his shoulders was accentuated through his shirt. Jade's pussy was wet with attraction, and she hoped that she wouldn't leave a trail behind her throughout the night. She chose not to wear panties on purpose. Jack and Jade were having the time of their lives, dancing, laughing, drinking, and flirting. Jade noticed a bamboo pole on the front of the bar holding up an awning to the entrance. This would work, she thought. She took $5 up to the DJ booth and asked for a stripper song. The DJ gave her a "hell yeah" look, and off she went. All the while, Jack wondered what she was up to. She pulled a chair out in front of the pole and asked him to sit in it. As the music began, she let herself go. Jade was all over the bamboo pole, not to mention Jack's pole as well. She moved to the rhythm of the music with a purpose. She spun around with a sexy flaunt of her ass bare to the world as she hiked her dress up to her waist. The glistening of her pussy was evident, as this was the hottest thing she'd done in a while. She maneuvered up and down the pole with fuck-me eyes and moves, leaving everyone around her with raging, sexual thoughts, especially Jack. She finished her striptease act by slowly sliding the dress up and over her head in the most seductive fashion she could imagine. It's a good thing that the song came to an end, because out of the corner of her eye she could see the owner approaching. Jade quickly pulled her dress back on and walked back to Jack with a smile as big as the moonlit sky. The owner approached Jade and told her she had missed her calling as a stripper. He still had drool running down the corners of his mouth. He, however, did advise her that she couldn't do any more stripping. Jade kindly thanked the man for the compliment and told him she'd be good, even though she had no plans to do so. Jack and Jade spent another hour, laughing, drinking, and finding somehow to touch each other every chance they got. Throughout the night they introduced themselves to more and more people who surrounded them and wanted a piece of the fun that they were witnessing from Jade and Jack. All it took was one crazy move by Jade to initiate the next goal she had for herself that night. She gathered her newfound friends around her like a huddle on a football field. She explained to them in a not quite quiet voice that they were all very attractive and that each one of them was turning her on. She explained that someone needed to take the lead to the next step for the night. Her voice spoke with confidence and lust, and hoped that what she was telling them was going to end up the way she had dreamt it would. She explained to them that she had a fantasy to be on the beach with sexy people, just like them, and spend the night sharing each other's bodies in an unlimited amount of orgasmic ecstasy. Everyone around her became bright-eyed, and she swallowed hard. She took a great chance and had no idea how this was going to turn out. As quiet stares overtook the scene, Jack piped up and said, "I can't imagine a more perfect way to spend a night in Mexico." That was all it took, as smiles began to appear on faces and looks of excitement began to materialize. Jade was bursting with emotion, grabbed Jack's hand, and ordered a round of sex on the beach for everybody before they took off. There was a new feeling to the conversation now, and as they sipped on their drinks, caressing and fondling became the norm. Jade had never been with another woman, but maybe she would try it out tonight, she thought. Her limitless courage led her straight to Maya, who lived in the States as well and was just there for the weekend. She looked a lot like Jade, and there was definite physical attraction between both of them that night. As they giggled over what was about to take place, Jade reached over and began to run her fingers up and down and around Maya's breasts. She cupped them in her hands and squeezed her nipples through the flowered, thin sundress that she wore. Maya gasped and returned the favor. The drinks were almost gone, and Jade decided to get this show on the road. She grabbed Jack's hand and yelled, "Follow me!" They all sprang from their seats and ran to the beach, where the moon cast a perfect glow of light upon a rocky platform next to the water. Clothes were flying off in the jaunt to the beach, and by the time they got there, no one showed any signs of shyness or of stopping. Jade jumped on top of Jack in a matter of seconds. She had not been with a man in so long, and he was one specimen of a man, she must say. She stroked every piece of his body. The curves of his shoulders sent tingling effects to her most intimate parts. Her pussy, wet with desire, begged for his rock-hard cock, eyeing to play. Jack kissed her neck in the softest butterfly kisses she had ever felt. His hands traveled up and down her body, sparking sensations where she never knew she had any. As his hands ventured in and out of her opening, her clit became aroused. She wiggled and moaned as his fingers played just the right notes, as if she were a well-tuned piano. She knew she wasn't going to last much longer. And then he removed his hand and replaced it with his mouth. His tongue went to work, lapping up the sweet cum from her inner cavity along the pathway to her clit. Soon she felt his tongue dance and pulsate around her clit. She could hang on no longer as her body began to twitch, and she unleashed an unequivocal tremor of orgasm. She pulled herself away and moved closer to his luscious cock, standing at attention. She lowered her head and took the entire muscle into her mouth. She floated her tongue along his shaft, making sure to touch every last nerve. As the tip of her tongue teased the slit of the end, her hands cupped his balls for their own stroking. Jade looked up to see his blue eyes smiling back down at her, as she knew the pleasure was pleasing him. She could feel his cock begin to throb in her mouth as it found its way to the back of her throat. She had more to do with him, and wasn't ready for the explosion of cum to occur. She pulled his cock out of her mouth, and without thinking, pushed him to the ground and mounted him like a rider mounting her horse. With her feet touching the soft sand, she glided his cock into her soaking wet pussy. She raised and lowered her body to feel every inch of him inside her. His thrusts back and forth were becoming more and more intense as she concentrated on his movements. The pressure was building inside, and she knew at any moment her body would succumb to the pleasure he was providing her. Jack grabbed Jade by the waist, and with the last few thrusts, she was overcome with a deep, tingling sensation that shook her whole body. As she let out a joyous moan, Jack let out a deep sigh of relief as his sexual tensions were unleashed and pumped into Jade. "Oh, please, don't let this night end," thought Jade. She knew Jack was thinking the same thing as he pulled her close to his body, feeling her hardened nipples on his chest. Jade looked him in the eye, smiled, and whispered, "There are so many more friends here to try out. Let's go." Jack agreed, and they both jumped up, brushing the tiny speckles of sand off their sweaty bodies. It didn't take long to see a tangled ball of bodies, all enjoying the pleasures that each was getting from one another. Cries of laughter, moans of ecstasy, and a few yee-haws could be heard from the patch of land on the beach. Jade woke up in her own suite the next day. She was reliving each minute in her head in amazement of what she had done. She didn't regret a thing, and was so proud of herself for allowing this adventure to take place. There were many more adventures to be had, and all she wondered was, what's next on my list? The end.
I hope you enjoyed the story this week, The Checklist, written by Sage Nite. Don't forget to follow and subscribe to the podcast. There's a new one every week. If you'd like to reach me, you can do so by email at donovan@donovankane.com. Many of the stories on this podcast are also available as audiobooks at audible.com. I'm Donovan Kane. Thank you so much for listening. For now, goodbye.